that ASU is number one in the US for innovation, ahead of Stanford and MIT for the last 9 years in a row, number one for sustainability, and in the top 10 of the Times Higher Education rankings globally for the SDG impact. Joining us today, we have the global CSO of Cisco, and many thanks to Cisco for our partnership. So welcome, Mary Wysocki. Well, I've been practicing this, but I hope I've got that right. We have Nidhi Pant, who is the co-founder of S4S, Sustainability for Society Technologies. We empower United Nations Sustainable Development Goal awardee from 2021 and winner of the Earthshot Prize for this year, 2023. We have Jaya Adapa, who is the Senior Vice President for Media and Content at Futerra. Yeah. Dave Rouse, who is the CEO of CarbonClick and the official office partner for Expo City for COP28 and beyond. And last but not least, Dr. Sebastian Groh, who is the Managing Director of SolShare, an Ashoka Fellow and winner of the Zayed Sustainability Prize. My name is Amanda Ellis. I'm with the ASU Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Lab and so honored to be moderating this incredible panel. We are at a critical juncture. The UN Secretary General has called Code Red for Humanity. We know that emissions are rising when they need to be falling. But we also know that of the top 100 economies, 69 are actually businesses or corporations. So we know that the private sector can play an outsized role in influencing net zero by 2040. And I couldn't be more excited to moderate this panel of change makers to give us some hope and optimism as to how we might actually get there. So I would love to start with you, Mary, to tell us a little bit about the exciting work that Cisco is doing. And I know that you are the first global Chief Sustainability Officer. Previously, you've done a lot of work in corporate sustainability, but now you are the first CSO, which is really exciting. So tell us a little bit about that and how Cisco is planning on net zero by 2040.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks for having us. This is so exciting and all of these change makers. You know, we all know climate change, it's the crisis of our generation. And the progress we make in this decade is critical for all future generations. Now, Cisco is a worldwide technology leader. And what do? We securely connect everything to just make everything possible. And we do this through helping our customers transform their networks, securely connect their infrastructure, power hybrid work, as well as help them on their sustainability journey. So, as we think about environmental sustainability at Cisco, we really embed it in the business. And we do believe that through partnering, we can really create a sustainable future for all. You know, imagine addressing a century's worth of pollution, creating economic opportunities for communities around the world, and really aligning our activities within the physical boundaries of Earth. But that's why I think we've got to even move beyond a sustainable future into one that's regenerative, one in which we're changing that mindset of do no harm into one where we're really creating systems and capability for social and environmental systems to heal and thrive. So at Cisco, our environmental strategies has three key priorities. First, accelerate the transition to cleaner energy and decarbonize, shifting from fossil fuels to wind, solar, renewables. Second, is really further evolve our business from a linear model to one that's more circular. And lastly, invest in resilient ecosystems. Like, frankly, companies are just not um, resilient. They really are dependent upon the communities, the societies, the economies in which they operate. And all of this is really underpinned by not only really strong governance embedding into the business. So not only am I balancing risk prudently, but quite frankly, we're also maintaining the trust that we have with our customers, our partners, our suppliers, the community, as well as inspiring. Amanda?
I love that. And the idea of by partnering, we can really help create a sustainable future is such a wonderful premise. Now, it's fascinating because the Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability was actually created over 20 years ago, the first globally and the first school of sustainability. But just like Cisco, we recognized a few years back that we needed to be thinking about regenerative futures and hence the Global Futures Lab. So it's so exciting to have this alignment in values and to know that a company with worldwide impact like Cisco has these three fantastic core values. We're going to turn now to Nidhi and hear a little bit about the work that she's doing to partner at the bottom of the pyramid. So, Nidhi, tell us a little bit about how S4S is helping to do that and using technology as a lever.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for having us to share our work. S4S stands for Science for Society. At S4S, we are working with smallholder women farmers. We make them climate resilient by helping them earn an assured additional income. So, untimely rains, heat waves, and climate change has around 20 to 30% of the total produce of the farmers to be of lower grade. This lower grade produce gets lower price in the market and is unfeasible for farmers to earn any money out of. Also, they have challenges in terms of unpredictability in market rates, distant markets, lack of infrastructure. So we help farmers, smallholder women farmers, use solar power to process and preserve their produce that would go waste and convert them into food ingredients. So we help the probable food that would go waste convert into food ingredients. So a tomato into a ketchup, and then we help these products get a higher market. So we supply to Unilever, Nestle, Indian Railways, to 1,600 different customers. So we provide women farmers with three things. First is solar powered technology, food processing technologies, so that they can do this, they can have a livelihood options by processing their produce and not helping that get and preventing it from getting wasted. Second is providing them with affordable financing so that they can buy these technologies. Women are all new to credit. They don't have any bank accounts. They don't have any collaterals, or their families cannot invest in them to start a new business. And third is we help them get this assured market through which they earn a $1,500 to $2,000 of minimum assured additional income. They don't have to be farm laborers and have an assured uh, livelihood option. So first is preventing food from getting wasted. Second is using solar powered technologies. So re- thinking about food processing in a very different way, decentralized way, giving democratizing it for smallholder farmers, giving more them more value. So rather than selling just fresh produce, they can sell more processed produce and helping them come out of poverty. To doing exactly what Barry was talking to, making communities more vulnerable communities more economical independent. So providing financial independence to women. Second is circular economy by converting whatever would go waste into more value added products and also decarbonizing everything by using solar power.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's so exciting to see these kinds of partnerships that can leverage technology. And I wanted to turn to you now, Sebastian, because you've got a very innovative business model in Bangladesh where you're also working at the bottom of the pyramid and you're using tech and tuk-tuks to help stabilize the grid. So, Mary, we're going to come back to you after you've heard Sebastian. We met recently in Singapore at the Earthshot Prize, and I was so impressed. I said to Sebastian, if you're at COP, we have to get you on a panel with Nidhi. It's just really exciting to see how innovation and technology and ingenuity can really help create solutions to what we're being told are intractable problems, but they're not. You're solving them. So tell us all about it.
Thank you, Amanda. And here I am, right? So fast it can go. And I think also building on what Nidhi said, I want to turn things a bit around. You just said tuk-tuk stabilizing the grid. For some of you, that might sound like an oxymoron, probably. So let me dig a little bit deeper into that. But we spoke a lot about Silicon Valley, so I couldn't resist of saying there are 5 million electric tuk-tuks in Bangladesh, electric vehicles in Bangladesh. This is more than Tesla has sold in the whole world. And these tuk-tuks are all taxis. They are all green jobs. They're all income generating. They feed 20 million people. They transport 100 million people. This is really impressive, but very few people know about it. And I think that's a shame. And part of it, and I hear this more and more here at COP, is the emerging markets, developing markets are often like kind of displayed more and more as the victims. Yes, need more financing. That's all right. But let's not only degrade them to that. I think in Bangladesh, in India, there's a lot of innovation happening which can even show the path for others. And you just said it's stabilizing it. We're building a virtual power plant, but not in a white paper. We're doing it. So to unpack this, there are 5 million vehicles right now. They all charge at 8 p.m. These 5 million vehicles is about 1.5 gigawatts on the grid. In a grid in Bangladesh, that means there's a blackout at 8 p.m. That's a huge challenge. So we put an IoT chip into the batteries so that we can control remotely charge and discharge. And only through that we can even stabilize the grid at 8 p.m. because when they come into these charging stations, they still have 30-40% left. We use high quality lithium batteries. A very big belief we have, and I think Nidhi would agree to that, is poor people don't need cheap products. Poor people need high quality products made affordable. Big difference. So give them very good batteries, which last very long. We can control them remotely. And so they are more efficient. We have 50% energy efficiency gains. We can push it to midnight and the grid stabilizes. It's a huge difference. Put solar on those charging stations. And I'm often asked, what is the big difference? That one big difference is simply in the behavior. These people cannot afford to charge their vehicles at home. There's no space. They can't put it next to their bed, right? Well, some even do that. So they put them all into garages of 50 and 100. That means if I aggregate batteries to the grid, I don't aggregate one battery. I aggregate 100 batteries. One battery is 7 kilowatt hours. So I have 700 kilowatt hours. That actually has an impact on the grid. That scale to 5 million is very, very powerful. And I think it's showing the way. So if one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change can show that kind of what you call ingenuity or innovation and drive, then I think that is the positive message we need, that then we can all do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sebastian. I love the fact that you're highlighting that those at the bottom of the pyramid can be solutionaries. So even when the odds are stacked against us, and we know they are stacked against women who are the majority of victims of climate crisis, and they're stacked against those in the most vulnerable communities, in the countries most impacted by climate, and yet they can be the solutionaries. And that's a wonderful segue back to Mary, because we know smart grids can really make a difference. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on smart grids and grid modernization.
As Dr. Sebastian just mentioned, the only way we're going to create that climate future is accelerating the adoption of cleaner energy. But it's very different in parts of the world. In certain parts of the world where power was very centralized, we are now in a new environment where it's very decentralized. There's different types of power. They're very variable. I'll give you an example where we worked with one organization, a top tier Italian utility, and we ended up putting routers and switches on thousands of locations. What this allows is information. Should we power up? Should we power down? Not only does it create more flexibility, predictability, adaptability, and then you've got even more intelligence that you can also provide back to consumers. We're also seeing trends in certain parts of the world where individuals are now becoming what I call those pro-consumers, where they have solar power at home and can actually use it for the home, but also provide it back to the grid. So the only way we're going to create that future, it needs to be more modernized, digitized. It needs to have the capability, but on top of that, needs to be secure. So it's a critical capability. And learning from those type of examples where in certain situations, the way you're problem solving is really leapfrogging, accelerating innovation.
And to do that and get those stories out there, we need storytelling. So this is a lovely segue to Jaya Adapa, who has been working with YouTube and now with Futerra and with a whole lot of climate storytellers. So Jaya, tell us a little bit about why it's important to get these kinds of narratives out to the broader public and how you help do that.
Well, I think the audible gasp when Sebastian said the numbers that of tuk-tuks, 5 million, that alone tells us uh, these stories have to get out there. And it's not just to make us all feel better or to say like, oh, look at how wonderful, how successful we've been in the climate community. It makes a huge difference when you think about how communities are responding to this crisis. Everyday people who are not necessarily interacting with the sustainability world, but they're concerned about climate optimism and the hope that there are solutions out there there are brilliant people working on this and that we will solve it. That belief has to remain, because if the moment that we think that we can't solve it is when we're going to lose. And so at Futerra, I'd worked in the media and entertainment tech industry most of my career, and I joined Futerra earlier this year. They've been Google had been a client for many years, and I really loved their approach to consultancy as for organizations to see sustainability as a competitive advantage. So if those 69 companies that are huge contributors and leading in this space see it as a competitive advantage, not just a good story that they can tell, but this makes a difference to their positioning. It makes them look better against competitors, and it actually also, and most importantly, it helps the planet. And so we look really at, with a very scrutinizing eye at what people's goals are around sustainability. It's not just about narrative, it's also about making sure that you're driving towards a solution. And then the last thing that I've been working on for a long time is thinking about climate communications. And, we have the most important message in the world and not right messengers, unfortunately. So how do we get these messengers, people like Sebastian, people like Nidhi, who are doing incredible work? How do we get those stories out to the public and make sure that that optimism comes from these stories and the hopefulness, because that's what we need. If we don't have that behind us, it's going to be really hard to solve this, harder than it already is.
And the most important message in the world, and we need the right messengers. Such an important point. So, Dave, a segue to you now. Obviously, to get to net zero, the carbon markets and carbon sequestration play a big role. It's a pretty confusing world out there. And as you know from the hours you've spent having conversations with me, it's really difficult to tell a story that people can understand. So, can you please give the audience some insights into Article 6 of Paris Agreement and how the carbon markets actually work, why they're important for net zero?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will always be residual emissions that need to be offset, even when we create solar, when we create a wind generator. It takes sometimes 6 years for the carbon footprint of creating that wind turbine to actually pay off. So there's always going to be a carbon footprint associated. And the thing is getting the Earth back into an equilibrium state where we're actually emitting the same amount as what we're pulling back out of the atmosphere, so that we're not making things worse. And then hopefully one day get to a state where we're actually restoring the planet, so that we can make it better for the next generation. But right now, as Amanda said at the start of this, our emissions are increasing every year, the amount that we're actually pumping into the atmosphere, and that's the first job to challenge, or first challenge to act on. And that's where the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015 to be able to recognize that once we reach certain temperature thresholds, there's a domino effect, and it's almost a point of no return at certain temperatures. Once you get certain amount of latent heat from polar ice caps and things dissolving, it takes a lot lower temperature to refreeze and so on. So you get all these intertwined mechanisms that fall over at certain points. So it is code red for humanity. We need to do all that we can, and carbon offsetting is just a way of accelerating that transition to net zero. So you've got mitigation and adaptation aspects of it, but it's really all green finance. It's really thinking about how we can finance the reduction of emissions, how we can finance the removal of CO2, whether that's through tech, innovation, or whether that's through nature-based solutions, which bring in a strong biodiversity element as well. I think you've probably all seen Sir David Attenborough's uh, uh, biography. Those are the kind of problems that we can solve with carbon offsetting right now. And there are a lot of contentious projects out there, which I don't think have true additionality. And true permanence. And these are part of the problems that cause lots of confusion in the world. And that's what we try and simplify is we have to go through an audit process ourselves at CarbonClick to identify which projects need supporting, because those good ones cost a lot more to run. And unless we get out there and tell the message and align, high biodiversity value project is almost uneconomic to run. And that's what we're trying to change, is making carbon offsetting more meaningful for those residual and unabated emissions. And really, the quicker that we can build up these forest sinks, restore the planet, and stop the deforestation happening, the quicker we'll be able to recover while all the technology and innovation is happening parallel to that.
Thanks, Dave. So it's really a both and. So we're looking at nature-based solutions and the tech solutions. And through that this common thread of how do we educate? How do we tell the right story? So Mary, I'd love to come back to you because Cisco has a lot of clients. How are you addressing the needs of your clients to measure not only scope 1 and 2, but also scope 3? It's a big challenge, and if we're going to get to net zero by 2040, we need to be thinking about how to do that. Can you share some insights with us on that?
This last year, what we heard from our customers is they wanted our help, our products and our solutions to help them on their sustainability journey. So they're really looking at our products and solutions to say, how do we reduce our energy consumption? How do we manage our energy? How do we also define our goals? One of the best part about the greenhouse gas protocol is it just creates interdependency between us, customers, our partners, our suppliers. And so, one of the first things that we often do is really look at their current environment and offer them new architecture that provides even more business value in the most secure way, at the same time, most sustainable, and providing that information so that they understand the ability to monitor it. All of this ultimately
It's great.
not only allowing their business operations, but of course, many of us are also reporting in terms of our ESG reporting, financial or non financial disclosures. There are some customers that are just starting. So, one of the first things that we do is help them understand our journey. How did we set our goal? How are we measuring progress? For example, next year, it's actually just next week, our annual purpose report is being published alongside an ESG hub. So you can go back and look at all of our past history, the progress, our strategies, our lesson learning. Environmental sustainability is one of those areas that we all should be collaborating, sharing information, explaining why we did something, and as well, making the connections between our networks. That's such a critical part for us to understand what's working, what isn't, and ultimately accelerating transition.
Did I hear you say annual purpose report? I love that. Annual purpose report. Oh, I wish every corporate did that. Oh, so Nidhi, what you are doing has a big purpose because you're really working with women at the bottom of the pyramid in India. Tell us a little bit about how you help educate not only the women themselves so that they understand how to use the solar and how to stop the food waste, but your investors, because you've done some interesting financial raises recently. Uh, how are you able to tell those stories and educate two very different groups?
Yes, I think one thing that how we see in empowering women is through three things. First is asset, second is body, and third is voice. So first we need to give them assets so they become more and more financially independent. And we look at development more as a freedom. It is an economic freedom for them. Second, we want them to have more voice in their families. So as soon as the income directly go in their hands, they are more as breadwinners in their families, so they can make more decisions for themselves as and their communities. And third is helping them take care of themselves so that they don't eat last, which is the body part of it. So that they think that, like what we usually saw before we entered a community, was that women used to eat last. They thought that this nutrition it's not something that they deserve. People who are earning in their families, they are the ones who have the first right on food. And that was so basic for us, that okay, as soon as they become also contributor in the family, they can actually start taking care of themselves and their body, because that's most important for them to take care of everyone else. So for us, we follow this structure of uh, empowering through them through asset, body, and voice. And the same thing is what we tell our customers, is that once these women, because for our customers like Unilever or Nestle, they look at us more as a value, as a more equitable and sustainable value chain. When our products are supplied to them, they have complete traceability on who produced the agri produce, processed it, what sort of energy was used in producing it, and it helps them to also uh, report it to their investors. So it's they really see value in investing in our value chain, because it gives them also more transparency to report it in their the procurement people, to also show that they have invested in more equitable and sustainable value chain. For our investors, they really value that we earn money only when the women earn money. So we take the produce that they make and supply it to corporates. So for us to survive existentially, so for us, impact is so ingrained in the model. We don't do two different things for impact and for earning money. So if we are earning, say, $30 million in revenue, we know that how much is going to our smallholder farmers. It's very transparent. So it's very as Mary was mentioning, it's very interdependent. That our survival is dependent on people, so we really need to invest in them. So for us, it's more of how we approach business, how we are doing business is really putting people and planet first, and that's our purpose, and then profit.
Which is good because you can have an annual purpose report just like Cisco. We love
Absolutely.
this. I hope this becomes a global trend, Mary. I love this. So, Sebastian, tell us a little bit about how you're educating your tuk-tuk drivers. And it is mind-boggling, isn't it, that Bangladesh has 5 million electric vehicles, which is more than Tesla has sold worldwide. So this just changes the paradigm. So tell us about how you're educating them. You're putting in the chip so that they're able to power the grid. Do they understand what they're doing, or are you just manipulating behind the scenes? So I'd love to hear about that, and also how you're telling your stories to your financiers and suppliers too.
It's a lot to unpack. I mean, first of all, I started to learn from our users and customers. And I'll give you one example is we were trading solar between different solar systems. And then we had a smart meter, and that wouldn't show kilowatt hours because that is a unit which doesn't make any sense to them and to anybody actually. But it was money. Right? I have, let's say, $1, and if my system generates electricity I don't need, I sell it automatically to my neighbor, and I have $1.10. And then one customer came to me. It was a lady, and she said, "Your meter does not work." I said, "What? Another technical problem." She said, "No, no, no, no. It's missing the whole point." I'm like, "What do you mean?" "See, it says I have $2, but I have lots of money in my battery. It's not measuring that money." what we call the portfolio of the poor approach. If I have to dissolve of all my assets, I need to know how much money I have. You don't tell me how many amps. You wouldn't use the word ampere hours, right? What's the value of 1 amp hour? I have 40 amp hours left. So if I was to sell everything right now, I need to know that. So we have to reprogram the meter. So that's a different way of teaching. And also with the tuk-tuk drivers, we learn a lot. One maybe to turn that on, one challenge we have is only 30 to 40% of them have a smartphone. And that's a challenge for us because our chip is in the battery and it communicates via Bluetooth, and then it goes to our cloud, and then we can control it. And then we try this vehicle-to-vehicle communication, all this technology, just because we need people to have more phones. That's Nidhi, what we were discussing on the way. If you try to solve too many things, I give them a loan for a battery, I give them a phone, then we will fail, right? Because you need to focus. You can't change it all at the same time. So these are some of the challenges also. In terms of communications, since we're also raising around like Nidhi right now, it is not easy because despite what the investors are telling you, they really don't have a metric to measure impact. So when my first slide says maximizing financial plus social impact, they only see the financial part. Okay, they know what a return on investment is. When I tell them I have a social return on investment of, let's say, 5x, there is nothing in their due diligence. It measures this qualitatively, but not quantitatively. And that's at the end what matters. So that is still difficult. And also, again, overarching thing here at the COP, that if I support the grid, yes, I get a different tariff, but does something like ancillary services exist in Bangladesh? No. So if I have a lot of positive output which is not remunerated, my business case becomes more difficult. And lastly, I don't want to ditch your question. The drivers are very well aware that if I use their batteries to stabilize the grid, that their batteries may have less life cycles. And that again is a very complex scientific issue. What is a life cycle in a lithium battery? Is it if I charge it in the afternoon? What they do now, they come in at 2 p.m. They know between 2 and 4, not much is happening. It's kind of, I wouldn't call it siesta, but for people here, then they keep their vehicle at the garage and charge interim, we call it a pit stop, for 2 hours, because they know, okay, in the evening, I can do then 40 kilometers more, which is another 50 cents, which is important. So, yeah, I'll keep it at that.
Fascinating, thinking about all the different dimensions that we need to focus on and really how complex the two-way learning is. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Uh, It's a big issue with greenwashing, and I wanted to come back to Dave and to Mary on this. So the carbon markets have taken a real hit in terms of public perceptions over the last few months and in terms of price on the voluntary markets. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about this whole notion of uh, how we can be sure that the offsets we're buying are actually doing good in the world. I was in New Zealand earlier this year, and we saw our pine plantations on their sort of second and third rotation washing away hillsides, no biodiversity, terrible slash. And we'd been brought to believe, 20 years ago that pine was the answer and that we should be cutting down indigenous forests, planting pine, and this was going to be a great way of generating carbon credits and saving the planet. But in fact, it's turned out to be much more complex. So, love to hear your perspective. I'm giving you a few things to talk about there, but love to hear your perspective on the carbon markets and then also on the offsets and greenwashing.
Yeah, so I guess we've learnt, and Bill Gates has learnt. We all thought 30 years ago trees are good, so we'll plant more trees, and that fixes the problem. And pine grows fast, so surely that's the best solution. And then we have all these forest fires, and Microsoft loses something like 30% of their carbon back into the atmosphere in a single fire season. Now, and this disregards totally the biodiversity element alone, but between the two of them, we've kind of learnt and matured and realised that actually nature had it pretty sorted before we came along. we probably should take some lessons from that and try and restore some of that, because that helps our future opportunities and survival. So particularly on marginal land, which is difficult and uneconomic to farm, because that's the really low-hanging fruit. The carbon markets have been exposed because most of the carbon offsets around the world are run by businesses and marketing companies that are trying to bring credits to market for something that, if they can get it through the certification process, they can sell it. So there's a lot of projects that already would have happened and were already growing, or whatever, that they've now said, well, there's a market for this, we can put it on the market. But actually, the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere hasn't been reduced by the volume of the carbon offsets that have funded that reduction. So we've got a net difference here. We know what's being emitted, and that's pretty easy to calculate. But this is the big problem to solve: is there's a gap here between what carbon credits are supposed to have reduced versus the actual concentration out there, and that's part of why this carbon market has, I wouldn't say collapsed this year, but some of those low quality projects have taken a real hit. The high biodiversity projects are still, in fact, in New Zealand, for example, we're paying $100 a tonne for indigenous reforestation, and that's not high enough. That's Kiwi 100, sorry, US 60. And it needs to be more like US $100 a tonne to be able to pay fair labour, to be able to control pests properly, and to be able to really enhance that biodiversity. So that's what we're trying to do, is build up those projects. It is on a good trajectory, to be honest, because corporates want to align with a project that's not greenwashing. They want to align with a project that they can say, here's what we're doing to be net zero. And that's strong, and I think it's going in the right direction.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave. That's very positive to know. And I'd love to hear from you, Mary, your perspective about greenwashing and some of the work that Cisco can do in terms of data and measurement to help perhaps obviate that.
Just a huge opportunity. I'll tie it back to education. Is I think that as we all are really understanding what is required to create that climate future, we're introduced to new words, new protocols, new measurements. And so I think first and foremost is helping understand what it is we're talking about. When we use a particular term, what is the difference between net zero versus carbon neutral? What is the difference between SBTI validated net zero to other types of claims? I also think, Dr. Sebastian, just love calling you that. There's also not only quantitative and qualitative. One of the things in sometimes the nonprofit space where they use a theory of change, where you really have a point of view about an input to an output and the ability to measure that along the line. So, in my opinion, we need credible, reliable, transparent data. And that is really required for us to set our strategy, our goals, our milestones. Where do we invest? It helps us understand how to build products. It helps us understand how to help our customers and partners make that shift to a more sustainable business solution. How hybrid work can be both great for employees' work and the environment, or how you set up a smart building and reduce power consumption. I also think transparency is so critical. But as we were grappling with how do we do our carbon accounting, you actually have some challenges because the data shows up in a formal way and informal way. Some of the data you've got to apply a calculation. Some data you need to enrich with maybe third-party data like emission factors. So we've been working over a year now across Cisco to really create what we call a data foundation, where we really thought about the strategy, the framework, creating a single taxonomy. We also are anticipating that climate data, where we report out to CDP annually, which I encourage all customer partners and suppliers, all of us to report.
Climate disclosure project,
Yes.
right?
Yes. A great database of our climate and allows us to really understand where we are. So we now need to understand where to take the next step. But as we build out the climate data, also anticipating that what used to be voluntary is involuntary, is really shifting to becoming a financial disclosure. So one of the things that we've been grappling with is how do you put in and really look at your data in a financial way as well, putting in controls, the ability to audit, the ability to know that it is credible, reliable, and transparent. And this kind of framework is one that, as we build, again, going back to sharing, something that we can share with anyone so that, again, we're leapfrogging and ultimately, to me, the data, whether it's how we're decarbonizing our business, how we're helping our customers, or even using IoT devices, giving all that information that allows your drivers to make decisions for you, the community. So I think the data, the digitization of it is critical.
And absolutely fascinating because you've just foreshadowed a trend that is really coming. So, New Zealand was the first country in the world to mandate climate financial disclosures. The EU just followed suit. And so, Cisco's ahead of the game here, but people are really going to be needing your tools to meet those requirements. That for us meant was the top 200 companies, which is 97% of our stock exchange. So you can imagine what's been happening in our small country as a test case, and it's unleashed all sorts of positive new business models. So it's very exciting actually to think about the work that you're doing to make data more reliable and more transparent and more credible is actually heralding a really wonderful pathway to net zero by 2040. I want to come back to you, Mary, and ask if you can explain to the audience the difference between carbon neutral and net zero so that we have a common definition.
So when I use the word net zero, and I use the word SBTI, Science Based Target Initiative, it's validated by that organization. So when I have made through our company a commitment, a goal to be net zero across our entire value chain by 2040, we went to SBTI and they validated. They looked at what it is that you're scenario planning out, for example, but it requires a 90% absolute reduction of your CO2. And then I can use potentially offsets or others for 10%. So when you hear someone go, I am SBTI validated net zero, it really aligns with the client science. You need to absolutely reduce. Now, you may hear someone talk about carbon neutral, and that's just another way of going, I'm emitting a certain amount, and I may be purchasing or investing in offsets to equal that. The climate science tells we need to absolutely think about reduction. I think that's critical. Another key part is when they talk about across our value chain, that means everything from our own energy use within our offices, our labs, our travel. It includes what is our largest category, which is scope 3, all of the electricity that is powering our products, our customers, and a partner site is part of our responsibility as well. All of the emissions from our suppliers. That is why it is how we work together to figure out how to accelerate the transition.
That is so helpful. And I'm seeing Peter Schlosser in the audience here, who's co-chair of the Earth League. Johan Rockstrom was really behind the Science Based Targets Initiative. And Peter and Johan will be doing a session here on the 10 new insights in climate science in a couple of days. And so it is so important that we have these messages from our top scientists globally that can get translated then by the business world into standards that everybody really gets and can use. So, very exciting to see this happening. Now, I would like each of you, just before we open up for questions, so please, audience, be thinking about anything you'd like to ask our brilliant panelists. I'd like to ask each of you about the importance of public private partnerships. And Mary, I'm going to come back to you last. But I remember 20 years ago when John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco at the time, was on the World Bank President's Global Private Sector CEO Forum that I managed, that you were doing a lot of work in the Middle East, training women in digital. So you're not only out there making money as a private sector company, but you're also a company with, as you said, I love this annual purpose report. You've been doing that for a long time. You've actually been helping in the public sphere for a long time. So I'm going to come to you last on that, but I wanted to start and go through the group. Nidhi, tell us about the importance of public-private partnerships for you and what they mean for your business.
For a business like us, which is all about systemic change, it cannot be done by one company, one organization. We need the banks, we need customers, we need non-profits, we need the government, and all of us coming together. So for us, it is how we do business. We don't have any other way. We cannot have only one part of the entire value chain. We need, that's why, everyone to work together. So banks funding the women at an affordable rate of 6%, not 31% how it was microfinance. So for us, each of our partners or each of the people in the systemic with a system which is uh, non-profit, the customers are important, and that's how we approach. And we would not be successful if we don't have everyone along. So I think for us, it's how we operate. And
Thank you. Dave, what does it
Yeah,
mean for you?
yeah. So in the, oh, actually, I've got two microphones. Sorry. In different regions, there are very different opportunities in the PPP space. So, New Zealand, we have a lot of engagement with government on emissions trading schemes, on climate-related financial disclosures act, and that sort of thing, where we have a lot of that ability to influence because of, New Zealand being a test bed for the rest of the world, for guinea pigs. But in regions like the UAE, for example, a lot of the private is kind of owned by the same structure as the public. So we're working with the likes of, well, trying to work with Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure here alongside organisations that we're already working with here, like Etihad, to build policy that brings in, as Mary, as you so rightly mentioned, that requirement for decarbonisation alongside the requirement to offset over time with residual or unabated emissions which can start now, but there's only so much land that can be planted, right? And unless we're doing both in the right percentages, we're not going to reach our targets. So
Well, congratulations again on being the formal partner for Offsets,
thanks.
for Expo, for COP28 and beyond.
Thank you.
Jaya, public-private partnerships for you.
Yeah, so for a long time when I was at YouTube and at Google, and prior to that I was at Sony, there was for many years, I'd say, almost an allergic reaction to, um, you know, any sort of regulation, right? And the companies really fought that, and not privately, really openly did. And now I think, thankfully, because of climate, actually, there's a much more partnership-driven idea where it's let's work together to make sure that we can come to good standards. We can talk about what we've done, communicate what we've done, and governments and local policymakers will give companies a seat at the table to make sure that legislation always has some, or potentially has some, unintended harm. How can we reduce that harm? So I think that that's been critical in the climate space, and we've seen that move in other categories as well. Like right now in AI and entertainment, there's a huge push for public private partnerships, and I think really climate has driven a lot of that.
Thank you. Such a great point. And we heard AJ Banga, the new president of the World Bank, say last night with Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, that in fact a regulatory framework that sets the right incentives is absolutely critical. And we were at the Abu Dhabi Finance Forum a couple of days ago, and we were hearing that message repeatedly from business. Business really needs the right regulatory framework to be able to have a race to the top. So, fantastic point. Thank you. Sebastian.
Yeah, I mean, I wish you had asked me that question 10 years ago when I came to Bangladesh and thought, I don't need public sector. I can do it. I go off grid, there's no regulation, also in a different kind of space, and I'll just go faster and do better. Yeah, until you're not. So, no, I think energy is this incredibly complex good. It's a kind of a hybrid version of a public and a private good. And so obviously you need strong buy-in. So from a business perspective, just replacing the toxic lead acid batteries with the smart lithium batteries would be my business case. And that would be fantastic. But the grid part is because I need goodwill. I mean, not it makes sense. It can have a huge impact, yes, but I need the goodwill of the government. It's so political, and especially if you are in a developing country where the force of politics can probably be very, very forceful. It is essential. But also I think what Nidhi said, if you wanna scale and if you wanna get this right, you need this in those partnerships. So we're working very hard on those.
Thank you. Mary.
When I think about creating a regenerative future or a purpose for an inclusive future for all, what comes to my mind is we all live, work, create in communities. So if we really want to create that climate future, that inclusive future, it really is how all ecosystem actors come together. Large scale change requires all ecosystem actors to come together to align with a similar vision. I think we also bring our own expertise and capability. And as you mentioned, we've had a long history. I'll give you one example. The Networking Academy program is an education, it's a training program. It's been around for 25 years. Every year, about 3 million students around the world are able to get trained and certified on the same technology standard, regardless of the company. It's primarily delivered through the education systems around the world. And I think that's a great example of bringing our knowledge. We know what is the technology, the skills needed, but it's the education leaders that actually know how best to build those skills. So I think that's one example. But what you've heard today is each one of us bringing out unique lenses, unique capabilities, and together, I think we can have a much bigger impact and faster.
Beautiful. And on that inspiring note, I will turn to the audience. Any comments or questions for our brilliant panelists? I, of course, have many if you don't have any more. Yes, Prem.
Thank you, Dr. Sebastian. So maybe a question that I think about a lot. Maybe I'll direct it to Dave since you're with offsets. So I was just on a panel last week in Oman talking with the aviation and the airports of the world. And to that point, how do you think in your mind with the aviation industry, which is one of the biggest offenders like technology, like other industries, how do you think where are we going with this? Is it gonna be an offset play? So we fly, but we buy an offset. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, good question. And it's going to be a challenge in the aviation industry, a bit like the concrete industry, which by the way is a higher impact, but less in the public eye than the cement industry rather is about
Just
8%.
cement is about 8% and aviation is around 2% or
No,
3%.
it's about 5%. Now it's
Gone up
gone
a
up about
lot.
1% from, well, that includes both transport and freight.
Okay.
So there's both transport is about 3% and cargo is about 2%. Um, remembering that cargo is part of just about every passenger flight, so that's how the calculations are broken down as well. So with aviation, right, it's a technology, it's an avoidance. How can we use, Cisco systems more to do virtual hybrid working models rather than fly everybody around the world? But we are humans and we do need to connect sometimes, and it's a bit hard to go to a funeral virtually or a wedding virtually or really bring everybody together in the same room to actually sign something virtually. So with aviation, that technology is, first of all, what can we do to reduce? And this is where public-private partnerships are really important because you've got air traffic control, you've got, the airports, the airlines, all having to work together to say, how do we reduce holding time so that we can reduce 5% of every emissions on flight with the technology that we already have without building new engines? Then it's how does GE and uh, Pratt and Whitney and so on build more efficient engines for these aircraft? How do we load them up? How do we take away business class and put everybody in economy, or as Ryanair have proposed, standing? But it'll take a lot of, virtual Airbus. It will take a lot of effort and a lot of technology. There's the book and trade system with SAF, but that's going to take a long time to spin up. They're predicting 6% of aviation fuel by 2030 will be SAF. That's
They
not
just
even a
had the
drop.
first transatlantic
Yeah, Virgin.
sustainable aviation fuel trip, right?
Yep,
Just very recently.
and Emirates also tried to claim the same thing for putting quarter of the tank of fuel with one engine powered by SAF across the Atlantic as well. So it is coming, but we don't have the supply of SAF available to fix this now. So to answer your question, it's a real challenge, and all that we can do is everything that we can do to reduce, avoid where possible, and lower the emissions, and have those public-private partnerships. Air traffic control is a big part of the carbon footprint that's untapped.
Thank you, Dave. That really brings us back to this idea of multiple actors, multiple players being able to leverage ingenuity and innovation, especially with the hard to abate sectors. And we wish we could move a little faster on the sectors that we already have solutions for. So I am very aware that Mary has another engagement. So we're going to ask each of our panelists to share with us their hopes for COP28. What is energizing each of you about the potential for COP28 over the next few days? And we'll start, first of all, with Sebastian, who has the mic, and then we'll go to Jaya, Dave, Nidhi, and finish with Mary.
I think my biggest hope or wish is that to pose a question, how can we have, sorry, Nidhi, I'm doing this now, but how can we have 10,000 Nidhis or 100,000 Nidhis? Now, that's really, we need an army of these kind of climate tech entrepreneurs. And just to give it, the answer is not to give more technical assistance.
I think coming out of this or coming into this, most people don't understand a lot about COP. So coming out of it, I would love for the public, people that are not in this world, to know a bit more about it. Also, just understand the complexity. To get 200 parties to agree to anything is not easy. And making something like that happen is a real Herculean effort, even with all of the challenges. So I hope we come out with optimism is really what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, so I guess COP, from our experience, it's an all or nothing opportunity, and unless my hopes are that the carbon footprint of running an event like this, probably around 250,000 tons, is going to be put to very, very good use with some outcomes that deliver, many thousands of times greater than that, not only in pledges, because this is the global stocktake, right? And COP26 was purported to have 2,000 times the emissions reduction as the emissions for running the event. But we'll soon see what the actuals were. But I'm hoping that this COP will be another positive ROI when it comes to our footprint for all being here.
My hope is that as much as there is focus on climate mitigation, there is enough focus also on adaptation. That we also talk about how more vulnerable communities can adapt to climate change as much, and that's also an important part.
As we were grappling with developing our environmental sustainability strategy, we were like, what did you call it? And we ended up calling it the plan for possible, this regenerative future. And I think you've all heard very real solutions, that there is real possibility to create that climate future. I'm so hopeful that we continue connecting the dots, building and strengthening partnerships we have, building new partnerships, and ultimately think about everyone who's not at COP. There are so many people that are watching and listening. And I hope that again, that through the storytelling and understanding what's possible, that we see even more people understanding that we all have a role to play and we need to take those steps now.
And that is a beautiful place to finish. We all have a role to play, the power of partnership, and the plan for possible. Please join me in thanking this terrific panel. Thank you so much, everybody. And I know we have another wonderful session coming up very soon. So please stay with us. And there is another panel at 2:30 and another wonderful presentation with the Vice President for Middle East, Rima Saad. Thank you all.